Good evening, Mr. Perfects. Hope we are all having a great week. You're here again for TRH, the Reconnection Hour by Mr. Perfect. I'm Terry, founder, CEO of Mr. Perfect, the charity. What is Mr. Perfect? I'm sure you've heard me say this 1,000 times now, but we predominantly bring men together at barbecues across Australia in public parks to create communities and connection for the betterment of mental health and to reduce isolation. What's TRH? Well, usually we chat to health professionals or other people doing incredible things in the world of connection, men's health, mental health, and generally in the community. So I've been incredibly lucky that over the past maybe 2 or 3 months, we've had almost weekly guests, some GPs, psychiatrists, psychologists, and other people that have set up movements a little bit like Mr. Perfect, and some really inspiring stuff that's been going on. A little disclaimer, or I guess just a warning for everyone. I've started saying this at the start of them to cover this off, but if we are discussing anything that's to do with mental health or anything gory comes up, it normally doesn't, but just to be aware, we are going to discuss topics around mental health, so just be prepared for that, just in case anything's triggering. I'm pretty sure it won't be, but just to be sure. How's my week been? I normally cover that off a little bit. Been fairly good. Work's kind of coming back to a bit of normality, whatever that is. I'll be back in an office next week for a couple of days, abiding by all the, how can I put it, not restrictions, but all the guidelines about getting close to people. I'll be going to my GP next week as well. I haven't seen in a while, and I really wanted to catch up with him. Absolute legend that he is. He's also very big on men's health and mental health, and we generally have a good chat, so I'm going to be booking in to go and see him. This week I've also been listening to a lot of podcasts and a little bit of a side sort of tranche, probably not relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight, but one of my good friends who lives up in Queensland, his name's Jamie Poltz. He did a very successful crime podcast called Beanham Valley Road, which I hope you guys will listen to and search after this. He's done a new one called Who Killed Joanne Holland, and it's absolutely brilliant. I love true crime. I love those sort of podcasts. Just brilliant. Really, really good. And I've been listening to that this week, and it's really got me thinking. And yeah, so I hope you guys listen to it. Now, tonight, we chat to another GP that I know, and I have had sort of, I guess, on and off dialogue with this guy for a few years now. We've sort of moved around the same circles, being in healthcare. His name is Dr Jaspreet Saini. I know him as Jazz. He is a GP, a clinical director, an advisor to healthcare authorities. He founded and runs a really successful practice in Sydney, which he set up last year. He's a huge supporter of Mr. Perfect, as you will soon see as well, physically. And he's one of life's great humans. He's always inspired me with some of the, I guess, his reflections on the world, any chats we've had, either by just a simple LinkedIn message or things he's posted. So I will await no further. Tonight, we welcome Dr. Jaz Saini. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Terry. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, as you said, Terry, quite rightly, we've been in conversation for a few years now, I think, and you know, it's been wonderful watching the Mr. Perfect journey and watching your community of people come alive and really start to connect with each other. I think it's been absolutely extraordinary.
I love it. As I said, you've always been a big supporter, and when I saw you pop up with a t-shirt on just before, I was absolutely pumped. So I think I was telling you, I over-ordered a few t-shirts recently in a few different sizes. So I have told everyone I do give them away free. Now and again, we do a little offer. So there you go. Jazz is modelling them for us. I'm sure I'll get a few requests for them after tonight as well. But yeah, so go ahead, Jazz.
Sorry, Terry. I was just going to say they're a very comfortable fit, so I appreciate it.
Great spokesman for us. So look, as we've already mentioned, we've had some dialogue previously, and it's funny how our connection, even though it's not been even like a big discussion like this before over the last, I guess, 3 or 4 years, I've always felt very connected to you, or on a similar wavelength, the way maybe you speak about things, or your empathy and compassion for the world. So to actually have this more deeper discussion is just incredible for me. So again, thank you so much. I would love to know first and foremost, and maybe this does, well, it definitely does relate to mental health. I've just put my kids to bed. I've got two young ones, 2 and 4. They, keep me up a lot and give me a lot of trouble, but they also give me just a lot of joy. You have triplets. Not many people I know have triplets. How do you cope with that, and how does it affect your mental health?
Yeah, look, that's a big question, I suppose, Terry. I think you're absolutely spot on. Having children is an absolute joy, and we were fortunate enough to have 3 at once. As you say, not many people have that opportunity, I suppose. But it comes with its challenges. There's absolutely no doubt about that. They're 2 years old now, Terry.
Excellent.
And they're entering a time in their lives where they're fiercely independent, and they want certain things, and they'll obviously demonstrate that they do. And it's up to mum and dad to guess what they're after and try to provide the right environment, the right nurture, the right care, and hope that their little personalities shine and develop to the best of their abilities. It's a beautiful journey, but it's very, very challenging, no doubt.
Yeah, I think that's the way I describe it when people have asked me. They see all of my Instagram photos and my social media posts and go, "Oh, just great photos, and look at them, they're having the time of their life." And I'm like, "Yeah, look, this is not. You do not see the bad times." But yeah, it's equally powerful as challenging as it can be. So look, first and foremost, I normally ask guests that come on just generally about your background, as deep as you want to go, upbringing, sure, and how really you got to, I guess normally when I have a healthcare professional on, how you got to become a doctor and why.
Sure, absolutely, Terry. Yeah. Look, it's always a difficult question, this one, because you can really go in a number of different directions. But look, I'll try my best. I suppose I was born in India. Came to Australia when I was 2 years old, and been here ever since. Typical migrant story. Your parents come here with a suitcase and a few dollars, and they build a life in a new country. So the attitude of working hard was always part of our family culture, so to speak, and. And fortunately, it was never said to me that I should become, a doctor or anything else in particular. It was a choice that I was lucky enough to make at a fairly pivotal point in my life, Terry, when I had a rather large car accident at the age of 10 in India. My family had travelled back, and all of my grandparents were still alive at that time, and we were travelling from a place called Punjab to Delhi and back to Delhi airport, and this was on our trip home. And our driver had probably not had enough rest the night before, and as it is with driving over there, it is a very difficult job, and they work extra hours, and they don't necessarily get the rest that they need to get. Driver fell asleep at the wheel, and we were on a bridge at the time. Truck approaching us from the other direction, and obviously our car hit the truck at quite high speed, and we were literally, let's say, half a meter or so away from falling off the edge of the bridge, and that could have been it, right? That could have been the end. That could have been the end of our life. And fortunately, no one else was injured, but I was, and the injury was. To a metal bar had come flying across from the front of the car to the back. I was sitting in the middle, and a bit of damage to the eyebrows and the nose at the time. We at that time, the closest hospital was a public hospital in India, right? And so we entered this facility where there was no light, the electricity had gone, there was no backup generator or anything like that, and they wanted to operate and stitch the eyebrow together and the nose together, but they had very basic equipment at the time, and my parents at the time decided that it wasn't a good idea and that they should go somewhere else. The somewhere else was a private hospital, and it was a complete contrast. We had access to a plastic surgeon there and then, and top-notch facilities, and you could just see the difference in the access that was available to us just because we had a little bit of extra cash available to us to pay for that private care. So the operation was done, and fortunately it was a good outcome in the end. But yeah, that was the initial thing that really got me into wanting to do more and wanting to be of service if someone were to enter a similar situation. It was amazing for me to see this doctor that, just with some very basic equipment was able to potentially save my life at the time. I remember that. The other thing I remember quite clearly that from back then, Terry, is not just the medical professionals, but at the time the accident happened, there was a busload of people that rushed off, jumped off the bus and came up to us, our family, and offered assistance in whatever way possible. Offered a handkerchief for me to wipe my face, and there was a three. In India, they have three-wheelers as transport. So there was a gentleman that drove us from the public hospital to the private hospital, and people that drive three-wheelers don't necessarily make more than just the basic amount of money to feed their families, and that's about it. But seeing the situation, he drove for an hour, took us to the hospital, and said he wouldn't charge us a cent, that it was going to be against his nature to charge us anything. I still remember that. I was 10 years old, but I still remember that reasonably clearly, that there was this example of humanity at that time, and so it was a contrast of this doctor that I wanted to be versus this human that I connected with, right? And your theme of your session today is connection. That was a real genuine connection for me, Terry, that there was this human that had not really too much in the way of financial resources, that was willing to give up his daily, so he could have been obviously transporting other customers at the time. He was willing to give up quite a lot of his time and his finances to provide for me and for my family.
That's powerful. That's incredible. Yeah, you're not going to forget that in a hurry, are you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I hope he's doing all right still now. That's amazing. Yeah, and I think as you're saying it, I'm going, I hope that what we see, out of what's happening right now, and the world is in a little bit of turmoil, of course. Like there's the positive parts and the not so good parts. I hope there's more of that comes out of this. The theme that I guess we've all been talking about. Maybe the negative sides of what we see right now are stories of disconnection, and unfortunately, that's just probably what we consume a lot as well. But I'm sure there's a lot more stories like that happening that we're never going to hear about. So that's kind of like my hopeful view on it. People in communities. I got a note from my letterbox today about someone who's going around collecting clothes for people, for their kids who lost jobs and stuff, and which I thought was that's brilliant. Like little things like that, you don't see that on the news. So that's amazing. And that specifically planted a seed for medicine, or how did that come about?
Yeah. Look, it planted a seed for me, wanting to help out in whatever way, and to serve humanity in whatever way. And I suppose it wasn't there and then that I decided it was medicine and nothing else. That evolved over a period of time. I think you go through. You go through a situation like this and you think, I can imagine myself going into a field where I'm helping people and potentially saving lives, and using whatever resources I have available to make a genuine difference in people's lives. Healthcare would have been a logical choice at the time, but you go through school and you go through high school, and I suppose you have doubts and second thoughts about whether you would be able to achieve the sort of grades, or whether you'd have the personality to be able to do what you had set out to do, and so there was a lot of personal challenges for me to conquer on the road to becoming a doctor. Fortunately, I had really good support around me. I had good friends, and I had a good family, good parents who were very encouraging always. A good sister who was also quite encouraging as well. That made the difference for me. That sort of pushed me over the edge and got me to where I wanted to get as far as a career in medicine.
Incredible. And what made it be general practice? What did you connect to about that?
Yeah. Well, I suppose, another story, I suppose, Terry.
Yeah, I
General
love it.
practice.
I love stories.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the narrative is what it's about, and that's what I continue to reflect upon. I mean, I think you think on a daily basis about where you are and why you're there, and whether it is the right place for you to be. And for me, general practice has been that consistently for a little while now. When I started my career in medicine, you do your years in university, and then you have some practical experience as an intern and as a resident. I had done a number of things. For a while, I wanted to be a surgeon. I did neurosurgery at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. And that was a lifestyle that was really high flying, and I literally slept for about 3 or 4 hours a night at that time. But I loved the adrenaline rush that gave me, and I suppose it was just one of those things where you think, wow, this is extraordinary medicine, and these people have such talents and such skills. I mean, the fine motor skills that are required to operate on a brain. All of those things were really, really interesting to me, and but then I felt like that about a number of things that I did. Anesthetics and pediatrics, and work in the ICU. Everything was interesting and inspiring, and I went through a phase where I wanted to do everything, right? And general practice was that. General practice was that, where you could actually practice a variety of different skill sets, but also connect meaningfully with people for the duration of their lives. And for me, that was the real clincher, I suppose. Just being able to build relationships like that, being able to build trust with my patients, and doing that for, as I say, cradle to grave. And I really, from the start of someone's life to the end of someone's life, but also the next generation, the generation after that. I think being able to do that is absolutely extraordinary.
And being obviously in general practice, and for as long as you have been, do you see now, I sort of rephrase my question the way I think about it, but I speak to doctors that I know in my day job, or that I know, or just through other people, when I ask them sort of one-on-one or sort of candidly, when did you realize that mental health, in its generic sort of term, was becoming more of a burden on general practice? Or when did you first realize, oh wow, and did that, I guess, also did that make your decision to set up your own practice, and the way you've done it, did that influence that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm understanding your question is, perhaps two parts to it. One is, where my interest in mental health and general practice come from, and two, whether that influenced my desire to open up a practice. Is that right, Derek?
Yes.
Yeah. So I suppose it goes back to uni days. So I did my uni in Melbourne, and my family is based here in Sydney, right? So my parents and sister, now obviously my wife and my 3 children. But at the time, it was, I wasn't married, and I didn't have kids back then. But being in Melbourne, one of the things that I found was, exactly, you mentioned this earlier, the idea of isolation. There were certain times where it was incredibly isolating. I started, obviously, so the way medicine works is that you have 2 years of theoretical learning. This is at Monash Uni, and each uni has their own structure. You have 2 years of theoretical learning, and then you go into what they call the real world, where you go to a variety of different hospital settings, and you learn from mentors and your colleagues, and that's how you map out a pathway in healthcare. So for me, that started off in my 3rd year of medicine in, the real big hospitals. So Alfred Hospital was one of them, and Monash Medical Centre, and a variety of others. And then following that, in my 4th and 5th year, I actually made the decision to go rural. So I spent some time in Broken Hill, and in Bendigo, in Moe, Traralgon, Victoria, and Mildura. So Mildura and Broken Hill were probably the most remote out of all of those areas. And so really it was just me in a backpack and people that I met along the way on the journey. There were times when, so for example, in Mali, which I did my general practice term in, I was actually living for 6 months opposite a funeral parlor.
Oh wow!
And that was quite, it was a very confronting experience for me, because the little building that I was living in was connected through an underground passageway to the big hospital in that area. And what would actually happen is the bodies, after someone had died, the body would be transported from the hospital through into this little building and then across the road into the funeral parlor, the mortuary. Yeah. And so, just the thought of that would at times when I was alone, because I usually had a housemate from Monday to Friday, yes. And she went back to her family on the weekends because she was a local. But the experience of that, just being alone and completely isolated across the road from a funeral parlor, and then the closest house being about 1.5 kilometers away from this little building that I was living in. It brought up all sorts of emotions, and it was my first brush with things like anxiety and depression, and first realization of my own vulnerabilities and my own mental health, I suppose, right? And so for me, really, experiences like that were what helped me to understand that there was much more to a person's health than the physical. His mental health was, no doubt, a substantial burden on many of us, and on ourselves, on our families, and that there is really a role for someone that has perhaps had some lived experience to be able to relate to other people with mental health conditions, or people that are experiencing difficulties in their mental health. And I reflect back on that now, and I think, what a powerful opportunity for me to have experienced those difficulties, and now be able to relate better to my patients, understand if they are talking about something in particular, where they might be coming from. And I recognize that my journey may not have been as difficult as the journey of many of my patients, but it still gives me an opportunity to be able to see things from a different perspective, which, had I had a more straightforward experience through medical school, I might not have had that opportunity.
I love the way you said that, because it made me also think of a GP I know very well, who's a friend, and I've kind of worked with professionally as well. And he almost said exactly the same thing. And like, from that, I was very connected to him, just meeting him first for a coffee. And he said some of the things he used to see and experience in his practice, which was at a university, and he said it very quickly. He saw, I guess, these sort of psychological presentations go up, or over a course of maybe the last 5-10 years, and he could really empathize with it. And they gave that feedback back to him and said, wow, like, I have not experienced this as much from someone. And he'd gone through some stuff himself, and he just said, like, I didn't think at the time I was doing anything special, but I just listened and was as attentive as I could be, and suggested some options. I didn't tell them, here's the 3 things you have to do, go and do them now. And, so no, that's amazing. So your practice now, I was curious to know, because not everyone watching will know too much about it, but how I understand from what you've done, it's slightly different to a traditional general practice that everyone might be used to. What things have you implemented there that, I guess, encourage that connection, or make it more comfortable for someone coming with a mental health issue, I guess?
Yeah. And I suppose there's a lot to the way we've designed our practice, but I'd like to probably focus more on the element that you're suggesting there, Terry, of how we make it more friendly as far as mental health goes. So the practice has an interesting history, and the history is that the practice was owned and operated predominantly by female GPs before I came in. And the importance of that perhaps is that, before I entered the practice, we also therefore had a predominantly female-based population of patients that we were seeing. Right, so what would tend to happen, and this is what I've been told, but also the data that we collect from our practice software is that for example, in a family, the wives might have attended our practice, and the husbands or partners may have attended a practice elsewhere, and we had a community of other male GPs around this practice that usually were the ones that provided that mental health care, or dealt with other men's health issues, right? And my coming into the practice, and also at the same time, these older GPs beginning to retire, meant that husbands and partners and sons and other male members of the family started to come across to our practice, and recognising that there was now a male GP there, found it more comfortable to start addressing their concerns with me. Which was really good, and made me want to adapt the practice so that it was as friendly as possible to being able to deal with those issues, but also encouraging for other males to start coming to the practice as well, and recognising that there was a male that was able to consult with them. Now, I've got to be careful there in saying that, just because I'm a male, that doesn't make me better with men's mental health.
Of course, yeah,
right.
Of course,
and that's quite important, because there are a lot of really good female GPs that are able to provide care that may far surpass what I'm able to provide. But I suppose, and I've often asked, because I have a habit of asking questions to my patients as well, to understand why they might be visiting me, or understand their worldview. I often ask, what is it about me that has meant that you've visited, or what is it about our practice that has meant that you've visited our practice to discuss this particular concern that you might have? And obviously you don't start a conversation like that, but once you start getting comfortable with the other person, then you're able to ask these questions. The answer, part of the answer is that blokes often find it easier to talk to blokes. I mean, that paraphrasing something that I've been told, and that there are often things that men tend to present with mental health issues differently to women. And Terry, you might have come across this yourself, and perhaps on YouTube. Yeah, and often there's something called a ticket of entry. Have you heard that concept before?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So I suppose for the audience, a ticket of entry is really saying that we as men often find it difficult to be vulnerable in front of others or with others, and so we will often come in with another issue that we start the conversation with. So it might be something quite routine, like our blood pressure. And then we'll proceed on, towards maybe the center of the conversation, or towards the end of the conversation, and say, look, and also I do have this, but we do that after testing the other person in some respects. We want to make sure that this person is going to listen to us, because once we open up, we don't like the idea of being met with rejection.
Of course, yeah.
Right, and so I think what I try to do as much as possible, and I'm sorry, taking a bit of a tangent there. I'm sorry.
No, that's great. I love that. It's very relevant. Very relevant.
Yeah, because I'm just reflecting on my thought process, and probably learning in the process of talking to you as well. If you've ever bought a new car, right? Let's say you buy a Toyota Kluger, for example, right? All of a sudden, all the other cars that you see become Toyota Klugers. You start seeing a lot more Toyota Klugers around you. And I suppose mental health is a bit like that as well. A GP that has lived experience in mental health tends to be able to detect your mental health concerns a little bit more readily. So simply having the lived experience, I believe, makes me more comfortable starting to gradually talk to the other person about how life is going for them, or what concerns they currently have, or how their family structure is currently going, or how things are going at work, and gradually the conversation starts to open up to more mental health concerns. So really, I suppose the answer to your question, the bulk of it really is just really listening and being able and willing to provide an open ear to your patients, right? That's number one thing. And the bulk of the work then becomes, if you have a few males that have been comfortable with speaking to you and reaching out to you, then they also start telling their male friends, and then they start to present as well, and start having these conversations. Not only that, I suppose our partners tend to be very good support people for us as well, and we tend to find that they may also talk to their male or female friends and say, hey, look, this guy is okay to talk to. How about you reach out, and he'll listen, and that's where the other part of the practice becomes quite easy in some respects, because you're sort of relying on the community to spread the message that, hey, we are quite comfortable and adept at talking to you about a variety of issues, part of which may include your mental health.
There's a couple of things there that sort of were so relevant and resonated. So one, the ticket to entry, like that's exactly it. My whole story went into my GP and said, okay, I've got feeling like I've got a virus. I've been a bit lethargic, my throat, and we went through this, 15 minutes, and I already assumed he wouldn't know, and I thought, well, how am I gonna? And I was kind of testing, but I'd already knew he was very empathetic when I'd gone to see him, and I knew he was also my wife's GP, so I kind of knew he was great with these sort of things. But still, with that, I still was testing, because I was going, well, is he going to know what to say, or is he going to make this really awkward? Am I going to cry? And I had all these things going in my head. And then the second part was, and he said, so are you sleeping well? And then I knew what he was doing then, because he was asking some very good questions. And eventually I just said, I've been feeling, like really down. And then boom, like it came. And then we went on that. And just that lift with me saying it obviously was a big thing. But 100% the ticket to entry, the testing, I see it in friends. I see it in friends of friends. I see it in others we've seen at the barbecue, even outside of a clinical, almost the brain wearing away, or asking a few questions, or they're checking, it's that thing about permission, which I've talked a lot about with some other guests outside of a clinical setting. Like, a guy needs to feel like he has that permission to do it, and it's not going to be, one, the permission, and two, it's not going to be shut off. So it's so relevant. And the second thing about the guys talking to other guys about you, or about any GP they feel comfortable with, I'm still amazed, because of my interest in one sort of healthcare technology and how things work in certain industries. But then the flip side of all the best stuff that I know in healthcare has come from, yes, I've read a lot and research, but it's been referrals, or by chance I've seen someone. So my psychologist, I saw him speak at an event, and 2 years later I went and saw him. Like, it kind of, I just really engaged with him. Mates ask me all the time. People now ask me a lot, and I'm just a bit more, I think it's great, like we're able to do that. But I also find it really hard now, a personal kind of thing, that people say, well, if you've seen a good GP and a good psychologist now, like, it's taking, you should, tell me who they are. And I have this real conscience thing of, whereby they're not necessarily, they may be very good with every man they see, but I thought almost that, what if I refer them and then they're not good? That's that thing for me. Like, in the past, I gladly do it, and now I'm very, look, they may be good for you. Please go and see, like, definitely test them out, but also, try these options as well. I have to be very sort of, I don't know, it's tricky. It's a real tricky one, because I've had guys who go, I went and saw that and they weren't that good. Like, well, not for you, maybe.
Yeah. Look, absolutely, I love that you said that, Terry, and you're spot on, and you know that is the truth, really. And I always, when I have conversations about, for example, psychologists that my male patients might like to see, I use the analogy of a lock and a key. It has to be the right fit, right? So, not every lock will be opened by every key, and similarly, not every key will open every lock, right? So my personality might gel really well with one particular person for whatever reason, and so it might be quite easy for me to be forthcoming with that person and be candid and share my concerns. And for whatever other reason, I might meet this other person who is incredible and very empathetic and has all the skills that would be valued as far as a mental health professional goes. But for whatever reason, I just don't click. Right. And that's okay. I think I always tend, I should say, I tend to forewarn my patients that, just because this person is the person I'm referring you to, doesn't mean that she or he is necessarily going to be the right person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you find that, one or two sessions, you're just not clicking for whatever reason, let's touch base again. Let's debrief. Let's find out what's going on. And if necessary, there's a whole community of other people that we can get you seeing as well, right? So that's what it is. We've got a community of people that would love to work with you and support you. And really, they wake up with the purpose of trying to be of some help, right? Their life purpose is actually to help you get on the right track.
It's funny how guys, maybe this is just an idea, but maybe we see it so mechanical and it's ingrained in us. I was talking to you before we came on about the basic questions I still get from friends, people through Mr. Perfect, from other, educated people who just, the basics of, maybe we missed the basics of education around what we need to do when we get to this stage, or who we should ask and what each professional does, because we see it so mechanical. I don't know, maybe we just assume it's mechanical. I go online, or I go wherever, I book the GP, I book the specialist, I do this. And then it's almost maybe we're not expecting that we connect sometimes. So when you do, it's powerful, right? Like, it's really powerful when you found out a doctor who that works for you, and you connect on that level, and then it can be a really good relationship.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I think the theme of connection really is so pivotal and so important here, because I think as patients, we often don't realize that our doctors, our health professionals, also want to feel this sense of connection as well. I mean, they desire the ability to be able to connect with you. It's a two-way relationship. It's a two-way partnership that you develop. Absolutely. If we feel connected, great. But also our doctors want to feel connected with us as well. Right. I think mechanical, I totally get that, because there's a lot of science that supports that idea as well. As men, our brain is wired in some respects to see a problem and want to fix it. Right. In some respects, there is that black and white that we have just genetically, or as a result of how we're designed, I suppose. The mental health is a real grey area. There's no real fix in some respects, but there's certainly ways to improve how we're feeling, how we're functioning, how we're perceiving the world around us, and to get us from point A to point B. We're designed to think mechanically, and this is a real difficult area for us to explore. It requires us to feel to be comfortable in our vulnerabilities. There's a great book, or a series of books by an author, Brené Brown. Have you come across her? Yeah. So I suppose for your audience, the book, one of the books of hers that I've read is The Power of Vulnerability. And I think really it's a great read for anyone that's interested in exploring the idea of vulnerability and what that means, and how we as men can be more comfortable to what she calls roll with our vulnerability. It's not an easy thing to do at all, but it's something that does require practice, and it's something that is actually quite reaffirming and actually helps us to build a more quality life for ourselves and for the people around us.
Definitely. And when that connection does happen, then I guess, and you get that with someone and you see them regularly, and let's say they're a male, and seems to be working, and what are the sort of patterns you've noticed generally? Like what works, or what do you think works, or you've seen results from that you've sort of given to your patients, like, and they've come back and they're feeling better about the world, or they're doing better.
Yeah.
What generally is it? Maybe there's secret sauce, not that we'll ever know, but
Sure. Look, I think number one, where to access the help is always the most important question, and there's nothing that there's no conversation that I haven't had in the four walls of my room, I suppose. Right. So just knowing for most people that your GP is able to talk to you about absolutely anything is always a good start. Right. So that's number one. So knowing that your GP is, any issue that you might be experiencing in your life, your GP is absolutely there and ready and willing to assist. Number two is, I suppose, Terry, and it's not directly answering your question, but I'm throwing a couple of things out just out of reflection. People often ask, well, when I go in and I muster up the courage to see my GP, and often it's actually quite a bit of a lag. So it might be anywhere between a couple of months to a couple of years. You mentioned 2 years before you reached out to the psychologist, right? So it can be a significant lag between you recognizing that something is going on and then mustering up the courage to go in and be vulnerable and have that conversation. There is often a thought of, well, what will I say when I go and meet my doctor? I recognize that that's the thing that I have to do now. But what do I say? How do I have this conversation? The answer to that is you don't really have to say anything. Let the conversation flow naturally. It's quite okay coming in with a ticket of entry, talking about your blood pressure to start off with. It's what a lot of men do, and it's actually quite an appropriate strategy. If it helps to get you to, into your doctor's office having a conversation. So whilst we recognise that this is a phenomena that occurs, it's actually quite okay to have that conversation in that way. And often your doctor will have had this conversation numerous times in the past, so she or he might be very comfortable leading the conversation and asking you questions, or if you feel that you're comfortable and ready to talk more, then stepping back and just listening to you. So don't go in thinking that you have to have a structured message to communicate to your doctor or your psychologist or other mental health professional. Just let it flow. What works in terms of what strategies work? Look, talk therapy is something that is often it's something that my patients and I do, and really what that means is that you just talk it out. Similar to what you would do in an office setting when you've got a colleague that you're close to that you might share certain things with, or with your partner or spouse, or with your child, or with your grandparent. Sometimes all you need to do is talk about a situation or talk about an event that's happening in your life, and simply the act of talking can actually get you moving beyond and to the other side of whatever challenge you're facing. It doesn't have to be a formal, structured psychological tool or technique that you use. Sometimes just talking is okay. But beyond that, there are actually quite useful frameworks. CBT is the most common one, something called cognitive behavioral therapy. And essentially what that is when I talk about this to my patients, I often relate it to things like going to the gym, for instance, right? So anyone that goes to the gym, that if you are trying to, for example, become physically strong, build muscle, build your biceps muscle, for instance, what you would do is can slowly build up the the size of the weight that you're carrying with your biceps, until you start off with 2.5. The next time you might find that you can lift 3.75 or what have you. You can in a very similar way train your mind to be able to cope with new and different situations, and that's what CBT is about. So the cognitive part is training the thought process, right? Training your mind to recognize what it's thinking and perhaps come up with a more helpful way of thinking. So if your tendency is to think quite negatively, then you can actually say, well, this is, you can actually break it up into, what would be the negative reaction to the situation? What would be, the over-optimistic or the optimistic reaction to the situation? And what would be something in between, which we would term neutral? And then make a decision about what the more helpful thing to think at that time would be. That requires a lot of training. Right, because we're turning off something that's automatic, and we're retraining the mind to think a new way. And the behavioral component is how we change our habits in response to our thoughts and our feelings. So, for example, if our natural behavior is to avoid a certain situation, well, how do we gradually build up the courage to confront the situation? So there's a number of ways that you can do that as well.
Amazing. And anyone who's obviously, and maybe I'm biased because I know you a bit, but anyone who'd be lucky enough to have you as a GP would clearly get, well, I can imagine would get that time to sort of be listened to and to feel comfortable, and to have that patience to kind of get through what they want to say. I had one of the guys here post. Let me just bring up the comment. One issue would be that, and this might be a particular scenario, when they've encountered their GP, they've been rushed or they felt rushed, so it's really hard to get it out in that time. What do you suggest? If there's an answer, there might not be to this, but how do you open up about it in a short space of time, or what's the best way to go about that?
Sure. Yeah. Look, actually, that's a fantastic question, right? And I totally get where you're coming from. And this is where part of this idea of testing out the doctor tends to happen, because we tend to have this feeling that we will be rushed. Unfortunately, sometimes it does occur.
Yeah.
I suppose our practice philosophy is that we're quite deliberate in the respect that if we have opened up the Pandora's box, so to speak, if we've opened up a conversation about our mental health, then my approach is that we keep talking, and our practice approach is that we keep talking, and everyone else waits. Right. I suppose what that does mean is that the next couple of patients might have a longer wait. But I suppose we're comfortable with that, and our patients have become comfortable with that, knowing that if we are running late, then it's because of a situation that needed the extra time, and should they require that in the future, they would also get that same attention to their care as well.
And I might be able to answer that a little bit as well, actually.
Sure, Terry. Yeah, of course.
It's complex. It's a mechanic also, I know, of the way the medical system is set up here. And if you've gone to a bulk billing clinic, or you've gone to a private clinic, or you've gone to a place where it's just set up for a different type of medicine as well. There's so many different flavors of a GP that you might see. So I can imagine how scary it is when you first go to one, or if you're going in with that problem for the first time and you haven't gone to the right practice for you or right GP, and you get that first up out the door in 5 minutes. That's scary. I was almost there, I guess, in this sense myself, but I just know from obviously working in healthcare as well, it's so much more complex. I wish everyone had the time, or everyone had a GP that was able and to do that. I don't think it's always a reflection on them. Personally, it might just be the way their practice is set up and the way they're working. And I know, actually, and again, I've been incredibly lucky. My second or third GP, well, more than that, but the one I'm with now, when I approached him maybe a year ago, a particularly bad time, he just did the same. He said, well, just talk. Like, and we talked it out, and I was incredibly lucky. Like, that's not an answer to the question, but he just said, okay, well, don't feel rushed. Like, let's just go through this. And I remember looking at my watch after it was like an hour. I felt so guilty. And he was like, no, like, this is, serious. Don't panic. Don't worry. Like, it's all good. And that made me feel incredible. I'm just aware that that's the mechanics of the GP I saw. I don't think I went in thinking he would do that. I also was watching my own clock going, oh, I'm going to be out here in 20 minutes. So another answer to that is I'd already thought of that. So I'd written down all the stuff beforehand. And I was lucky enough that I knew him. So I sent it to him and said, here's all the stuff, like, I'm going to, and I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's just what I did as my own mindset, because I thought I was going to be rushed. Like, it's a really tricky one. It's really tricky. But the upside of that is Dave has commented, my GP is great to deal. I feel free to discuss any issues with him, and had a good luck with him over the years. Again, mixture of luck, circumstances, probably where you're based. I can imagine also in, I know from experience, the regional and rural areas less serviced, might not have the capabilities all the time to be able to spend as much time. There's just so many variables to it. It's good to hear people having good experiences too.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, Dave, that's excellent. And I suppose I do a bit of work, Terry, educating GPs and visiting registrars in their practices and examining them. And part there is a simple solution to that. And often the solution is to say, hey, look, this is actually really, really important. And if you are running a really tight schedule because of a couple of emergencies that have come your way, and I've been in that situation sometimes, it's actually validating the other person's concerns and saying,
yes,
this is big, and I know it's actually taken a lot to say this today, and I wish we could have a long conversation right now about it, because it deserves a longer conversation. But look, I also don't want to rush things. So is it okay if we book you in tomorrow? Let's have a 30-minute or 45-minute slot just ready for you to go, and let's have that longer conversation. So it's not the idea that it has to happen right now, but it's the validation that, hey, this is actually really important. I'm so glad you've talked to me about this today, and I think it deserves the time that I would like to give it, and that you would like to give it, and let's actually, how are you placed at this time tomorrow for us to have a conversation, or what's your schedule looking like, because I can make some time in mind.
Love it. And one of the guys else here, John, I can't find the comment now, but he said, how do you keep your, here we go, what do you do to keep your head clear? A doctor with 3 kids. So what do you do to connect to yourself, to the outside world? What do you do?
Look, and I mean, that's a question that, in fact, John, that I reflect on every single day, because life does get overwhelming quite regularly, in fact. And when you've got quite a few things going on, you do need to make sure you're maintaining your relationships with your family as much as you can, but also performing well at work. And I think part of it is showing up, and showing up in the right way for your patients every single day, and that's very important as well. So I think there's a number of things that can stretch your attention one way or the other. For me personally, and Terry, I suppose some of this, I have a morning routine that I'm quite set on, and that morning routine has traditionally involved exercise, but more and more it's starting to involve meditation as well. And just reflecting on the morning, and practicing a few things such as gratitude and compassion. And part of that compassion is self-compassion. Actually, waking up with conversations with yourself. Certainly you have conversations with other people, conversations with yourself. Just reminding you that you are valued, and that and it's actually okay to look in the mirror and say that that you are loved, and that you are valued, and that you are important. So those are very important things to be able to do. For me, I've been inspired by a number of people around me, Terry, yourself included, and I'm reading a book at the moment by a guy named Vishen Lakhiani. I'm not sure if you've heard of
No,
him.
no.
He's from a he's from a well, he's the CEO of a company called Mind Valley, and so he was working a number of odd jobs before he started that up, and now Mind Valley is a big thing which teaches meditation, the power of meditation, to people around the world. But he has a book called The Code of the Extraordinary Mind. There are some very useful things in there, John, that I practice quite regularly, and I think certainly a book that's worth reading if you're interested.
Definitely, I will make sure I put that in the comments after this and send that to everyone, because I'll be picking that up as well. But it's funny, you were saying about, I think you alluded to it by saying exercise used to be the main thing, and that's what it was for me pre-kids. And then I used to beat myself up because I didn't find the time, purely because my body was whacked from, no sleep and trying to cram in work and all the other commitments. And then I've become a bit more kinder to myself on that front. And now if it's just a 20-minute walk a day, or if it's just literally getting around the block like I did today, I had a full day, but I just thought, I'm going to go around the block, go get my coffee, do this, put a podcast in, whatever, and come back. But that wasn't too hot. That for me was like that was the equivalent of exercise that, I don't fit in as much as I do anymore. So again, being kinder, I love it. That's a really important point, I think, because we all think, again, like this social media world, and get out and exercise every day and do an hour and get ripped and do this, but realities can be quite different. So
they can, Terry, and I think the way you've phrased that is perfect. Be kind to yourself. Really, that it's as simple as that. I think if we just say that a few times each day, it will have a very powerful effect on our lives.
Love it. And look, almost at time on the hour, but what we normally say is one of the last things for our guests is leave us with it could be a quote, it could be a piece of wisdom, it could be a suggestion to the audience of how to better connect with the world. I know you've covered a lot already, and it might be something you've already said, but is there anything you'd like to sort of leave us with?
Thanks, Terry. And look, really, for me, more and more, as I've experienced life, what I've realised is that certainly the connection with those around us is important, and it's what gives us joy, it gives us meaning to our lives. But I think there's a lot to be said for connecting with ourselves. Right. It probably isn't practiced as much as it should be. I think there's a huge role for all of us to find out more about ourselves, find out what makes us click, find out what makes us happy, find out what we desire in our lives, right? Just spend a little bit of time each day, whether it's through meditation. I think meditation is certainly something that more people should take up. I'm late to the party. I'm just starting to experience the benefits now. But the idea is that meditation in the traditional sense, which has been, you go off into the mountains somewhere and you sit down for 1 or 2 hours and think of absolutely nothing. I think that's not practical in today's world. Your mind will always be operating. You can't really switch off your mind. Meditation more in the sense of just asking questions that are important and meaningful to you. Whether it's what experiences in your life are meaningful, what experiences would you like to have, and what are the adventures you would like to have, how would you like to feel more connected with yourself, with your family, with those around you. Just spending a little bit of time each day, I think, Terry, asking those important questions.
Love it. That's an amazing way to end our discussion. Thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. I know you're incredibly busy. It's amazing it's taken us this long to have this proper conversation, but I'm glad this connected us and brought us together, because I'm sure we'll be continuing. We could have covered a lot more as well. Where can people find out about you if you want them to? Or is there a website or anything you want to leave us with?
Yeah. Look, you can connect with me on the practice website, rosedale.medicalpractice.com.au, or really, same way as you, Terry, I'm on LinkedIn. So, if you search for my name on LinkedIn, I'll be there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jazz. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And look, I hope we have a good end to the week, and we'll see you again soon. Cheers, Jazz.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.